Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Monday, March 7th. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend, but it was not a great weekend to step away from the screens. Lots of volatile price action in the crypto markets. Also some interesting news breaking surrounding the Phantom network and the Phantom ecosystem. We will talk about that and a lot more before we get started. CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Thanks. Doing well, Monty. Yeah, interesting waking up yesterday, seeing Phantom down 16, 17%, while the rest of the market was just down like 1 to 3%. You look at the news and the lead DeFi architect, or really one of the most prominent individuals behind that project who had a cult following, being Andre Cronje, really just decided to step away. It was a very abrupt transition. There wasn't really a lot of great communication around the matter. As you can see, they use the word terminating these apps and services. That's not actually true. They terminated their involvement, but the projects are still going to go on. Well, for example, Yearn Finance, YFI, went down very drastically yesterday, but the reality is that Andre hasn't worked on that project in over a year, and there's over 150 staff and developers maintaining it actively in a community. So these projects will continue, some of them for the most part. Obviously, it's a very strong blow to the sentiment and morale around the project, but that was the reason for the massive drop yesterday and how price changed so abruptly.
Yeah, CJ, and the effect was more pronounced with some of his newer projects. And, for obvious reasons, we saw Phantom, like you said, hit hard yesterday, down 17%. But his new project, the automated market maker, Solidly, that was down as much as 75%. That's his most recent project. And as a result, it was hit the hardest with the news that he will be stepping away. But this has kind of been something that, it was hard to predict, to see coming, that he'd be stepping away so abruptly like this. But it's been a crazy month for Phantom. We covered, Daniel Sesta and the Saifu thing with the Wonderland, whole debacle, and how, Saifu was involved with Quadriga. All of that was, certainly tough on Andre. You could see kind of his, unwillingness to participate in Twitter discourses. He deleted his Twitter last week, and then we got this announcement over the weekend. And, it's had some pretty profound effects on price action. But like you said, CJ, Yearn Finance, he hasn't worked on that project for a year. So that project's more or less on autopilot. And, in some ways, getting him, as kind of the figurehead, getting him out of the way is kind of a good thing for some of these decentralized, finance services. Having this one centralized point of failure is kind of a weakness and counterintuitive to the basic principles of, what DeFi is. So although this is a massive hurdle to overcome in the short term, I do think this could potentially be, a good thing in the long term. But still, that's all contingent on developers stepping in, continuing where he left off. It is open source, so they, can just continue right where he left off. But we need to continue to see, innovative steps forward in these projects. And I think they have a lot of work to do over the next couple months here to kind of gain back the confidence of speculative investors. So this was a big headline over the weekend. We'll continue to watch it this week, but I think Bitcoin's price action will have a lot to do with what we see from Phantom as well. And Bitcoin, CJ, had a very wild weekend. Anything you want to touch on with the Bitcoin charts here?
Yeah, of course. We have a new week, so we might as well start with the weekly candle. So not the most bullish, obviously, especially when you just have inverted hammer candle. Typically leads to continued bearish price action, even when near or at the bottom of a downtrend. So just something to keep in mind there. Of course, it does not have to happen. We do have some more bullish setups on the higher time frames, which we'll get to in just a moment. But still tentatively turning up from oversold levels. So we'll see how things go with the weekly chart, but not the most bullish candle, definitely. Going down to the daily chart, we still are holding that ascending triangle formation. Last week, we talked about this particular level and how it was probably going to serve as pretty tough resistance at 45K. Ever since we've seen that, and we were looking for possibly a place to buy the dip. I'm not saying buy, or I'm not going to be buying in terms of an investment, perhaps a shorter term trade, you get a bounce up, you get a continuation of this ascending triangle here before some type of potential breakout. That's still in the cards. However, really, we need to hold this critical level, namely being 38.7 to 36, really. I would not want to see something where this level actually fails as support and then we get a retest back up into it and it fails, or the trend fails and it becomes new resistance. That would be the key sign to me that, all right, this is probably going to test the bottom of the range, or at least maybe some of these range lows at around 33,000. So just something to watch out for there. But we still are maintaining the ascending triangle as of now. So we'll see how that plays out. But overall, that's kind of the interim chart on Bitcoin. I will show, I will go in a little higher time frame here. We have had a little deviation I just want to show. So you see kind of deviation just beyond that support level, very similar to how we had one last time before subsequent rally. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty in the global commodity markets and fears of heading towards a recession and so forth. One thing I guess I should mention before I get to a more macro perspective on Bitcoin is just the DXY. And I'm actually surprised to see Bitcoin up today with the DXY going absolutely parabolic. This is some of the most bullish price action I've ever seen in the DXY. It's really heading towards some of those 2020 highs above 100, especially if you zoom out from like a weekly perspective. If we continue to see the DXY trend and go parabolic, I find it difficult for Bitcoin to rally in spite of that. It's just going to be different unless that fundamental relationship changes. It's going to put pressure on equity markets and Bitcoin in that matter. But
yeah, CJ, you and I were talking before the show started this morning, and we talked about how the DXY was up, oil making a very impressive run, gold up, and I think you made a great point about what that could potentially mean for Bitcoin. What do you make of all of this, commodity price action, and what do you think this could potentially mean for Bitcoin going forward?
So I think one of the most concrete examples is just the price of gas and that effect on consumers. It's really reaching highs that we've never seen, or we haven't seen in the past, months or year, and that's going to put pressure on everyday consumers, especially with lumber prices, things of that, global supply chain issues and whatnot. Overall, it's going to mean less purchasing power or less free money to be able to spend on things like investment, like savings. And typically, I think that's going to eliminate some retail participation from Bitcoin, at least in the short term here. When you just don't have as available of money and you have higher prices on basic necessities and goods, I just feel it's going to lead to less money, at least from the retail perspective. Now, the institutional perspective could be something different, but we just haven't seen kind of that bullish narrative play out yet. So short term, there's a lot to break down, and a lot of factors we don't really know which will happen. But the most direct one just seems the rise of costs for consumers is going to put pressure on Bitcoin. There's going to be less funds available ultimately. And that brings me to my next point, which is I do want to show a logarithmic growth curve of Bitcoin and where we are in terms of like the macro cycle. We are starting to enter into, I guess, what you could call the buy zone, or relatively fair value in terms of Bitcoin. Every time we've been in this green channel, historically, it's been a pretty optimal time to accumulate Bitcoin. Now, I can't ignore the fact that during the Black Swan event of March, we did actually deviate 50% to the downside from this particular logarithmic pattern. Of course, we caught up with it very quickly because of all the money infused as a reaction to COVID. But does this model hold up in the face of potential global recession or uncertainty? I guess we'll see. Nevertheless, I do think it's interesting and noteworthy that we are dropping into some of these lower levels. When you look at the log curves on a much higher time frame, we are actually holding some very important levels for now. but we are really on that critical one. Any thoughts on that, Monty, or just Bitcoin in general right now?
Yeah, CJ, to your point there about kind of what led to that relief rally following COVID, so much of that was contingent on money printing from the Fed, stimulus. And now, although that kind of narrative of the rate hikes that are kind of looming here in the coming months have taken a back seat to this Russia-Ukraine conflict, I think that's still going to be very important. And to your point, I think that's another thing that will, determine how much retail investors are involved in this market. It's not just going to be the rising cost of everyday goods, but also whether or not the Fed decides to hike rates significantly or not. So we have lots of unknowns, lots of potential catalysts for either positive or negative price action that are very close here, right on the horizon. So whenever you have that massive uncertainty, it's hard to deploy any capital. But what I will say is that in terms of a macro perspective, CJ, lots of these indicators that we've relied on in the past that have been very accurate in calling the bottoms of other market cycles are starting to flash signs of accumulation here below 40K. So I think it's very important that we maintain these critical levels here, put in a higher low, don't sell off below 36K in the interim. And, this week's price action, I think, will be very important for determining what we see here in the coming weeks to months. So we'll be keeping our eyes on the charts. But yeah, I think that's all I got, CJ. Anything else you want to add?
It's just that 38 level is very important. That really maintains the bullish structure. And if we lose that, we could definitely retest bottom of the range potentially, especially with the DXY oil rates continuing to go up here. So just a lot of uncertainty, and markets don't really like that. But things could really change quickly. If some type of outlier event happens or the conflict kind of improves for some, results. So I think it's just important to be nimble here and open to a lot of various possibilities. But overall, thank you guys for watching. I'll leave you with the final word, Monty.
Thank you, CJ. Yeah, that's all we got for today's episode, but we will be doing our members only Doge of the Day right after this, where we take a more in-depth look at some assets. If you want access to that and a whole lot more, you can sign up at the link below me, markrebellion.com/try crypto. Got a pro charting service, a chat with members from all around the world. We publish actionable trade insights. We have a watch list, education curriculum, and a whole lot more. So definitely head over there and check that out. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Definitely helps out the channel. But that's all we got. We'll see you guys in the chat room.